Welcome to the first episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. I'm your host, Dan Ricoveri, and this is our guest today, Mr. Terry Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. It's great to have you here today. So, how do you feel?
Doing well, keeping busy. My regular day job. I'm a Google prompt engineer these days, and just keeping busy, working on my fifth novel, and planning and sketching out ideas for my next book series. I write a series of novels. The website is called the VimHood Chronicles.com, VimHood It's basically a play on steampunk. Vim for energy, steam, hood for punk, steampunk chronicles. And it's a website you can find fairly easily. You can look me up on Amazon. Also, I've got my first novel, Terry Mark, Kill the Night, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison in the Old West being chased by a vampire gunslinger. That's my first novel. Originally, I got a degree in screenwriting. And about that time, there was a number of novelists who came out and said, hey, you know what, write a novel, because it gives you a lot more canvas to play with. And then you get your novel, you write your novel the way you want to, and hand it off to somebody else, because you really don't know how the screenplay is going to turn out in it anyway. So I spent a lot of time in the 90s trying to come up with some ideas. I had a convoluted Air Force One kind of an idea for a novel. I don't remember the movie it's based on, but a young Alec Baldwin and a young Jennifer Jason Leigh were in a movie where the very famous scene was Alec Baldwin gets off the plane in the airport and he comes up in a Hare Krishna and he grabs the guy's finger, breaks it, and he dies. And as I recall, Harvey Keitel starts chasing him after that. He was a criminal who stole from other criminals. And I thought, well, that would be very interesting. What if you had a serial killer that killed other serial killers? I'm not intimating in any way that my idea was blossomed into Dexter. The thing is, I couldn't make it work. I couldn't make the concept work. I didn't know what the motivations were, and I would have probably never thought of putting him on the police force. And that indicated to me that I just had really a limited maturity in the vision and understanding people and other things like that. So it caused some existential angst in me. I ended up working with the crab boats in Alaska for a couple of years. And when I got done, I said, I really have another passion that I actually am pretty good at, and it was politics. Not as a politician, but as somebody who knows how campaigns work, how the government works.
Like political science?
Yeah, political science, political sociology. I like the study of what drives people to think certain things. Why Eva Peron or Mao, or why they do those certain things. And I was very interested in, maybe helping my community or my country. So I got involved, and I was pretty good at it. And I did that for about a decade, and then I got all the way to a presidential campaign, and I'm a bit of an autodidact. I'm self-taught. I could tell you, I never enjoyed a single English class that I sat through for getting an English degree. I really never learned much of anything in political science, because growing up at my grandmother's knee from the age of 5, I always watched all the Sunday political shows. Everything that you could already talk about really kind of was already new. I got a master's degree in it because I had a congressman and a couple of prominent professors who really urged me to get an advanced degree, so I did it. And I worked in that, but it burnt me out. If you could imagine any kind of lifestyle of waking up half the time on the desk that you're working on in your office, and you've got your clothes stored in the back of the car, and you take a shower in the local gym, that's what politics is. It's a hard life. But the other thing I had been working on was the internet was new. Websites were new. I was working with HTML.
You mentioned it from the 90s. So how long has you been a writer?
The thing is I was a writer for almost everything that I did. I wrote magazine stories, I wrote newspaper stories, I wrote press releases, I wrote stump speeches, anything that you kind of imagine doing in job, I always said, hey, I can write. But I never sat down and wrote a novel or a screenplay again. Nothing long, nothing a big story idea. So I always pursued a work that had something to do with writing, including building websites. And then that led to being a webmaster for the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. And then following that, I came to Colorado and I started working for a digital marketing firm. And that expanded on everything sort of that I knew. Politics and campaigns and websites, technology, everything was kind of expanding and building on itself. And that's when I learned enough of figuring out, okay, commonly called the trope. The trope might be the search for the Holy Grail, right? As a story. Everybody knows that story. But then you would take that and you combine that with a character study. And a simple, fun one would be, everybody knows the werewolf story, right? It's what they call a trope. Then you put Abbott and Costello meet the werewolf. Then you've got kind of a comedy. You're combining the character with trope. So I looked and I thought about a lot of ways to combine them. And I kind of stumbled onto Tesla and Edison. And I knew about 1893, 1894, the electrical exhibit. And I thought with a vampire, electricity. And I added Carbell, who's a pretty central character. She's a big magazine reporter. right?
I can imagine. I have a question. Tell me,
Sure.
when you started your journey as a professional writer, what was the thing that get you the most troubles?
Okay, you mean when I started writing the novels? I think the biggest problem in writing the novels was really bringing my writing level and finding my own voice.
Did you edit a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. I probably rewrote the first novel 3 times. And going through it and finding my own voice and going, wow, I need another chapter here and I need a chapter at the end, and figuring out how things work, and realizing that I had a character who all of a sudden halfway through the story just disappeared and I never did anything with him again. And then finding other ways to make my writing my own voice. In other words, all of my 4 novels, I don't use the word was. It's a passive verb. I structure my sentences so that I avoid passive verbs. And it brings out a certain style. You have to structure your sentences a certain way so that wases, that Daniel was riding on the horse. You have to structure your sentence differently to not use a passive verb in order to bring out my own voice.
Well, on my case as a writer, I talk in a past tense mostly because my story is narrated by someone. It's like someone telling a story. So I talk in past tense, so I do use that word a lot.
Right. The only thing, it's like using just, right? Oh, he was just over there and it just started doing that, and that was just about. Just is another one that I don't like, using in my written form. And the other thing is I developed, right? See, I also use Grammarly, which I think is a very effective tool.
I do have one too.
Yeah, and I was able to, after a couple of months of training it would ask me, don't you want to restructure your sentence? Like, no, I don't want to do that. And then after a couple of months, when I accidentally used a was, it went back and went, you don't usually use this word. And I went, oh, thank you. So it starts to keep my voice in check.
Yeah, I can see that. So, how it started? For what I noticed, you really like steampunk, right?
Yeah, I think because it excites my imagination more than regular science fiction. And when I say to people, look, you understand that the first 10 minutes of Star Wars, the first movie, is kind of steampunk. He's out there in the desert, he's running around, maybe he's got that little speeder, but the world is kind of very low tech. Yeah, there's spaceships out there, but Tatooine is very low tech. So I think one of the early things that I read that fascinated me was John Carter on Mars, right?
Oh, yeah, I know that.
I mean, this is Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is Tarzan era. This is the early 1900s, and someone is writing about John Carter going to Mars, right? And there's no great tech. There's no anything. He's just kind of magically transported, which is why I was so disappointed that they messed it up so badly. But I think there's so much that you can do with that, because restricting yourself, restricting the technology, restricting your ability to do certain things actually makes things more exciting, right?
I agree with you, especially on high magic stories or extremely technology. Everything can be solved with the right spell or the right machine or whatever. So yeah, I do agree that limiting that, it's a good idea.
Right, and that's sort of the philosophy that I went through with writing the series, the VimHood Chronicles, what I'm calling the Beast Saga. And then I'm going to start a new VimHood Chronicles, which is basically going to be sort of steampunk, but it's going to be fantasy.
Sounds pretty interesting. So,
yeah, it's not going to be lots of spells and things. It's going to still be the Vim crystals, and the world is going to have certain rules to it and things like that. Calling it, like, I don't know, Serpent Sails and Bloodthorns or something like that.
Do you share rules between books from different series? Like, that some authors, even when they have different series, they always share things like names or one character that doesn't really relate with the others, but sharing little things like, to do a little fan service.
I hadn't considered doing that outside of sharing the Vim crystal, the Vim energy with the fantasy and writing a few basic rules about things. I think that probably I would not do that. I have one very minor character that runs through all the other novels, so I probably would not do that.
That's okay. So, tell me, since you started writing, do you feel that you changed as a person?
No, I don't, and I would mainly fall back on my experience in retail politics, setting up a booth and handing out brochures, and you want to vote for Joe for mayor, and things like that. I think the biggest problem for most writers that I see are, one, they've decided they're going to write alone. And I started up my writers group so that I have people that I share with and work with all the time. The other thing, now this is, politics and marketing, they just don't know how to get out and sell their book. They don't know how to do that.
Yeah, lately people are into self-publishing. Some don't trust publishers, or publishers don't accept their work no matter what. Most writers, especially when they're starting, are pretty lost.
Yeah, and the problem is that there are a lot of predators out there who are saying, hey, I can help you publish your book and market your book. If there's anything that I would tell to somebody who's listening to this and thinking about, hey, I got a book. Well, number one, if you've got a book, you need to have several books before you start anything. Because if I pick up a book, almost everyone I know picks up a book and goes, wow, this is kind of interesting. What else does this guy do? That's the first question they're going to ask. So you need to have several books. Even if they're not the same series, you need to have several books of your work.
Actually, my publisher said the same thing to me, that I should have a series or two before my debut.
That's absolutely true, because it makes all the difference. So you have your series, and then you need to go out and you need to sell it yourself. You need to sell your name, and you need to go to your local Comic-Con. It doesn't matter what kind you write. You write a Western, you write a science fiction, you write whatever. It doesn't matter. Show up at a Comic-Con, put up a booth, try to sell your books. You know, with your help, with the graphics that you did for me, that was not even the second attempt that I did for doing stand-up banners and everything else. Once I talked with your organization and we said, hey, this is what I want. I need to project an image, a message. I need a setting. I need the whole thing. And that takes time. You've got to just talk to people. You've got to gear up your elevator pitch. You've got to have the whole concept of the series, how it makes sense, where everything goes, and you got to stand up and you got to talk to people about it and do that. Because even if you marketed books for 5 or 10 years, you are still going to have to do all of the things that we're talking about. You're still going to have to go to the cons. You're still going to have to go to book signings. You're still going to have to go do all of those things. So you get your book published on Ingram Spark or Amazon, whatever you want to do. You get into Barnes & Noble, you get into the grocery stores, you get into the local markets, you get into the Comic-Cons, and you start to just sell your book. You got to do that whether you have somebody marketing your book or not.
That's
Be
actually
prepared.
a great advice.
Do all of that before you ever even start thinking about marketing. You know, I spend every weekend at a Barnes & Noble, from Cheyenne to Colorado Springs, or I'm at a grocery store, or I'm at a con, from Wyoming to South Colorado. So it's really a matter of getting out and doing those things. I mean, the person who gave you the advice that says you need to have 2 series of books or whatever, right? You need to have not just one set of books, right? This is one series, but you need to have 2, right? I sat next to someone in Kansas City who had 2 series of books, and he sold about 50% more than I did. The guy across from us had 3 series of books and sold 3 times what I did. More books, more sales. That's what I can recommend. It's not terribly hands-on. Like I said, I'm just a prompt engineer.
What are your go-to methods to finding inspiration when you are on a slumps, etc.?
Research. In the room over the wall behind me, I have my bookshelves full of politics and philosophy and religion and other subjects. I give you a good example. When I was writing my first novel, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison are being chased by a gunslinger vampire, and I came up to the ultimate question that I confronted occasionally with people who say, I'm smart and I'm going to catch this guy. They say they were enemies. How do you make them work together? And I will admit, it gave me pause for about 6 months. And then I realized it's the wrong question. I simply said, I don't have to do that. I don't have to get them to want to work together. Once I answered that question that way, it became a matter of, okay, then what happens? Well, the gunslinger wants to put them together in order to eliminate them both at the same time, right? That experience is one I rely on quite heavily when I get stuck and I keep asking myself the same questions and not having an answer. I step back and go, okay, maybe this is not the question that I need to ask. Maybe I need to be asking a different question.
Do you have like a writing routine, like something you religiously do when you start writing your book? You know, like you wake up to this hour, you eat, that you write every day, 3,000 words, stuff like that?
No. The only guideline that I have ever held myself to is that I try to produce 1,500 to 2,000 words a week for the writing group. And like last night, we were eating dinner and it was like, let's just watch a movie and then I'm going to go to bed. Right? So sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I work from 7 to 3, so sometimes I will work 2 or 3 hours in the evening and write 1,000 words that day. Or sometimes I won't write for several days. And on the weekends, my days usually don't start until about 10 or 11 o'clock, you know, for the Barnes & Noble or the grocery stores or the con. And I'm a 5 o'clock riser. So I'll get up, wake up, take a shower, have some coffee, sit down, and I'll have a couple of hours that I can write before my day gets started in the morning sometimes. My goal is just 1,500 to 2,000 words a week.
I see. What do you want your readers readers to take away from your writing?
A love of history and the characters. Realize that what you read in there are people and places and things, where people were. I don't put somebody where they couldn't have been. A lot of what happens in And the Sun Goeth Down, I was not very familiar at all with World War One. I did not know that most of our troops were down there on the border with Mexico chasing around Pancho Villa. I didn't know Copper Canyon was 4 times the size of the Grand Canyon. I didn't know all of those details about it. I didn't know all that history and all of the things that were going on. And I found it just absolutely fascinating. Once I dropped myself in and said, okay, I know enough history to say that Frankenstein coming over to Mexico and trying to raise an army to open a front against us, it's only a spin-off of the famous Zimmerman letter with Germany and the ambassador, right? It's just taking that idea and advancing it into the realm of science fiction. So once I dropped myself into it, there are, finding places to go and understanding what the map looks like and spending time down in and delving into it, realizing I spent a lot of time researching the characters and the Indians live in those mountains and those things.
I think one has to be careful, especially when you are doing historical fiction or historical books in general, because you need to keep the original essence, especially because you don't want people to misunderstand certain historical figures.
Right.
So yeah, I do know that those requires a lot of research. Do you have plans for your next work that you can share with us?
Yes, I have a sort of a prequel novel that I'll be launching very soon. I don't know that it's going to be in paperback, but it's an origin story of the gunslinger and Frankenstein. And once that's complete, I've got in my head, I've got a steampunk fantasy series that will be taking place a few hundred years in the future, where something has happened with the Vim energy and the world is alien. The world is upside down. Things don't work the way it should. And the world population is decimated, and most of the world is an ecology that we can't eat the animals, the vegetation, we can't do anything with it, and things are upside down and turned around.
Okay, Terry, we are a bit short of time, so let me ask some questions. Can you tell me in which platforms we can get your work? I mean, I know that you sell it yourself in many places. You can go personally. Do you use certain platforms like Amazon where people can get your book?
Well, my books are on Amazon and they are available on my website. I'm on Ingram Spark only as far as the bookstores, the corporate bookstores and the independent bookstores can purchase through there. So if you think you want to try to get my books into a local bookstore, then let me know. I can call them up and say, hey, you can get my books on Ingram Spark.
Of course, that sounds great. So tell me, is there any advice you would like to share with your fellow authors?
Don't write alone.
Yeah, you did mention that.
That's my big one. When I meet other authors, I just say, look, don't write alone. We are by nature
social collective species?
Yeah, we're not outgoing. We're introverts. Most authors are introverts, right? I think my work in politics, in, raising money, shaking hands, kissing babies, getting out there, walking streets, made it a learned skill. But I'd be just as happy on a lake in Alaska where you can't even drive to my house, frankly. But you got to do it. You have to be more extroverted. You have to be willing to talk with people. You have to be willing to get out and sell your books. You have to be willing to do all of those things.
And lastly, what message would you like to convey to your loyal readers who support your work?
Thank you. Thank you for your reading. Thank you for buying the books. I have something coming out very shortly. It should have been out at the end of the year, but I've had some difficulty in finishing, but it's due to the research. And I can tell you what you can count on me in the future is the same style and the same commitment to character and the same commitment to detail and research. I'll be putting out a fantasy mystery series once the final book is completed.
That sounds amazing, and yeah, I do understand how this takes time. Lately I've been checking Buddhist mythologies because I wanted to add something related to the 3 poisons of humans, but yeah, it always takes time. Thanks for having you here, Terry. Thank you very much, and thank you all for watching us today. This is Writing Inspiration with Markee Books, and thank you for having us. Goodbye. Bye, Terry.